We are going to continue with our Contoso University app, and we are going to be modifying the student pages so that they display enrollment data. And we can do that because student is related to enrollment. One student can take more than one course, and that is tracked in the enrollment table. And because enrollment is connected to course, we can also pull in the courses through that course enrollment connection. So we are going to be updating our student pages to basically pull in that related data for view only, not to update, but just to view. Now in Razor Pages, as we've talked about before, the business logic is in the classes. And the logic that handles the database is done through Entity Framework using the DB context. Okay, so our, wherever that context file is, there it is. Our school context behind the scenes Entity Framework actually utilizes this to handle all of the logic needed to maintain the database. And so Entity Framework is using the repository pattern. And the repository pattern separates the business logic from the logic needed to maintain the database. So Entity Framework is handling that for us. And we are going to start making changes to details, which is a display only view. And we are going to start with the code behind, because we have to change what data is being passed to the view. And the onGetAsync method is what we have to change, because right now, once it determines that the ID is there, it's just passing the first student row that it encounters with a matching ID. And so we need to change this just a little bit. We want context.students. That is correct. Await is correct because we're dealing with the database. But now what we need to include is the enrollments and the course. Right? And then at the very end is where we're going to be checking for the first student. So we're going to modify this just a little bit. I'm going to press enter here, and we'll move that down a little. So students is connected to enrollment. So that is the first thing we have to include. So we're going to do dot include. And this link method is specifically used to query a related table based on that primary key foreign key connection. So we're going to do a little lambda here. And S represents the data that we're going to get from enrollments. And then we're going to do S dot enrollment for enrollments here. We'll tab over that. And once we have student connected to enrollments, then we can connect enrollments to course. So the link method that we're going to use for that is called then include, which kind of makes sense. And we're going to refer to enrollments as E, or excuse me, course as E. And honestly, the letter that you use here doesn't matter. We could have put a C, And it doesn't matter as long as the letter you use here is the same as the letter you use here. And then we're going to put in course. Now, because enrollments and course are not going to be updated, we do not need Entity Framework to do the tracking in the background. And the tracking basically keeps track of the state of the data in enrollments and course. But that data is not going to change. So tracking is kind of memory intensive, and we don't need it to track enrollments and course when they're not going to change. So we are going to add as no tracking, that method, and it's going to turn off tracking for enrollments and course. Okay, and then the last thing we're tacking on here is the check we want it to do on student. Okay, and remember, the ID is either going to be entered in the URL, or when we are looking at the index, which is a summary of all the students, when we click on details, the code behind is going to grab the ID from the index page. The index page has the ID on it. Okay, so when we're on the index page and we select the detail link, it is getting the ID from the index page. When somebody keys it up in the URL and they have ID equals and then they put it in, it's using that ID. Okay, and so here it's just checking to make sure the ID that is in the database is equal to the one that got passed into this method. So that is the change that we're going to make here. So what we're going to end up with is the correct student and their related enrollment and course data. And you can see we're pulling all the enrollment and course data in. This is all going to get passed up to the details view. So the next thing we need to change is the details view because it's getting more data than just student. So we are going to go ahead and look at that. And so we're going to have to modify this to display that enrollment data. And we are going to put that in right after the enrollment date. And I'm going to do a little copying and pasting here. The data that we need is right here. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight it. Okay, so one thing to note here is we've got end table and end DD. So I want to make sure I paste it in the right spot. Oh, interesting. Let me see. So this is being pulled in as a table. So you should be able to paste that whole section right here. Okay, and then we have the end DL, end div, end div. Okay, so here's the entire table. Okay, here's the data definition that it's inside. Okay, and then above that is the enrollment. All right, so here we've got a table. And it's going to display course and grade, course title and grade. Those are the headings. And then this is where it's going to grab the actual data. And this is being grabbed from the enrollment table. Okay, and so for each, we're giving that each row in the enrollment table a little alias. And the only rows that are going to be here are the ones that are related to our student, because the data was kind of filtered based on the student ID. Okay, so all of the rows that are available are the ones we want to display. So it's going to go through each one. And the title is coming from the course table. So we have to do item.course.title. Grade is coming from the enrollment table. So we can just do item.grade. Okay, so that is how we're going to display it. Let's save this. And what we're going to modify next is the create page. If we update our student table, which we will be doing, and we add a hidden property, what we are doing in our create code is not very secure. So we're going to take a look at the code behind create. And if we look on the on post async, we look at this code. It is checking to make sure there's not an error. Okay. And if there is no error, we're basically updating the student. We're calling add, and then we're saving the changes. This is what changes the tracking to added. And then we're redirecting to the index. And this is fine unless you have a hidden field. And if you do have a hidden field, it is possible for a hacker to fill in the data for the hidden field. And then that will get updated when the add is called. And, you know, hackers don't usually update fields with anything that you would want in your database. So we are going to change this because we are going to be changing the student class, and we're going to be adding a secret, literally a property called secret. So that will be our hidden property. So what we need to do in here is make some changes. I think it'll be easiest just to copy and paste them. So that's what I'm going to do, because there are quite a few changes to this little method. All right, so let's talk about what it's doing now. So we are creating a new student object called empty student. And instead of using the on post async, now you will notice that we've got try update model async. So this is what it's checking to make sure that all of the data is filled in and that we don't have any hidden properties that are filled in. So these are the only ones that should be changed. Okay, so this is try update model async, and we're looking specifically at the student class. And then we are making sure everything is filled in. And then we follow up with the add, save changes, and redirect. Okay, so right now, this probably doesn't make sense because, you know, you look here and you're like, yeah, everything is being filled in. But what we're going to do is add another property in here. called secret. And this is something that we are not filling in our form. And we do not want hackers to give them the ability to fill this in. Okay? And so changing the code behind to specifically look for the fields that we want filled in is a little better way to do that. And we'll get rid of the bind property because now we are kind of binding through code. Okay? We are making sure these things are filled in. And we're purposefully omitting secret because we don't want that to be filled in. For this little view model section, we are not going to make these changes because they are not carried out through all of the views and we end up getting errors. So I do want you to know, though, that a view model is typically used to pull in properties from multiple classes. And so this is pulling in properties from student, but it's also pulling in the enrollment, some enrollment properties as well. But we are not going to make these changes because this change to use the student VM is not carried out through all of our views. Okay, so we are just going to move forward here to updating our edit page. And we are going to be changing the on get async and on post async. Okay, and these are what we're going to be changing it to. And I believe they had find first for default, and we're changing it to find async, which is a little bit more efficient than the find first. And also find async is typically used if you don't need related data. And so we are changing it there. And then down here in on post, we are going to use the try update model async, which is safer to use if you have hidden properties. Okay, so what we're basically going to do is just copy the entire thing. And then we will paste it over the current on get async. So let's go into details. And here is the, edit. Oh, that would have been a disaster. Make sure we're in the right one. Here's the current on get async with first or default. So I'm just going to paste this new one over the top. And then we're also going to do the same thing for on post. And as you can see, this current one is not using try update model async, and our new one is going to. Now, entity states we have been talking about. And so every time we call save changes async, it's going to change the entity state to reflect the change that just happened in the database. So if we are in an edit, the change that is happening is it's modified. If we are in an add, the change that is happening is that the data was added. And if we're in a delete, the change that happened was that it was deleted. Okay, so those are the typical states that are going to be updated. There are some other states as well that are listed in the tutorial, but added, modified, and deleted are primarily what we are going to be doing. So let's save all our changes. And then we are going to go into the delete page. We're going to make a couple changes in the code behind so that if there is a problem, it can display an error message to the user. Otherwise, it just kind of hangs and they aren't going to really know that the row didn't get deleted. So let's go into the code behind here. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do. So right now, the delete page isn't logging errors the way that we would like. Okay, so you can see we have our, our context file. We have a student object here, or property, excuse me, student property. And then we've got the on get and we've got the on post. The on get is using first or default. And we will be changing that, I believe. Nope, we're keeping first or default. Oh, and that makes sense because we are going to need to remove related data. So if the student doesn't exist, then their enrollment doesn't exist either. So that makes sense. And down for on post, let's see, what are we changing? We are going to be actually throwing an error. We're going to add some exception handling. So we're going to take this code that normally is just inside here, inside an if, and we are going to be adding it to a try. And then for the catch, we are going to be creating a log error. So let's go ahead and make the change. I'm going to just copy all of this because there's actually quite a few changes. We are pulling in some different classes. So we have some using statements that we have to add. We have to add all of this logger information for displaying the error. We have to add an error string or an error message string that's going to be passed over to the view. So there's actually quite a bit that we're doing in here. So let's copy and let's paste over the top. And again, let's kind of look through our changes. So we have a couple additional using statements. We are creating a logger property. It's private. And then here is how it is handling the logger. We've got an error message we're creating. For on get, we're checking to make sure the ID is valid. And here we've got adds no tracking, which totally makes sense because we are deleting it. So don't probably need to track any additional changes. And we've got first or default here because we do need to pull in the related data. And then we've got if student is null, that means they couldn't find it. And then here is the error message. If we are unable to display the student, this is the error message that is going to be passed back to the view. Okay, and then assuming that everything displayed properly and we submitted the change, it's going to run through on post. And again, it is possible that two people have pulled up the same student to delete them. So that's what this is checking for. If the ID isn't there, somebody else deleted them first. Otherwise, it's going to go ahead and do a try on removing the student and saving the changes. And you can see if that was successful, it redirects. Otherwise, if there's an error, we're going to catch it, okay, using the logger. Okay, so now that we've adjusted this, let's save it. We have to actually go to the view itself, and we need to add a little paragraph to display any error messages that are passed from the code behind. And that is going to go at the top of the page right below our title. So it's just going to display that error message property that got passed. So at this point, we're going to save all of our changes. And let's do a build. Okay, so it should say succeeded. It should not have any errors at this point. So before we move on to the next section, which is going to involve quite a few changes to our index page, what I want you guys to do is go into Student CS and just comment out secret, because we are not going to use it, and therefore we're going to comment it out. Because if we were going to use it, we'd have to incorporate it into all of our code, or account for it in all of our code. And so what we're going to do is I want you to be able to run this. So first, let's go ahead and do a build. Make sure we don't have any errors. It says mine is up to date, so that's good. Yours will probably compile, once you do this, and it should succeed. And then we're going to come to the package manager console. So again, you go to tools and you get package manager, open up the console. We're going to drop the existing database. And we'll say yes. And if you remember in our program CS, it tells the system or entity framework to create the database if it doesn't exist. So we're going to go ahead and run this so you can see those changes that we made to the detail view. Okay, so here's what it looks like. Let's go to students. And you should be able to display this without error as long as you commented out secret and you dropped the database. Okay, and we go to details, and this is where our changes occur. Okay, so now we have all of this fun information for the different students. Go back to list, let's pick somebody else, and you see their courses. They don't have any courses. Okay, so that should all be working before you move on to the next section.